Hey there guys, we're going to take a look. This is kind of a special video. I did have a fan request to take a look at a deck, so what you're going to see here in the background is a kind of mix together of a whole bunch of different example games I did. Recorded a whole bunch of games during testing and put up the replays. So I'm not going to actually show the deck list for this one because it is not mine to show. But I do want to give a response to this person, and I find it easier to throw up the videos. This way they get an opportunity to see the deck as I played it. Probably the same as how they played it, but visuals are never a bad thing, as well as kind of my thoughts on it. So saving me a bit of typing, I guess, is the easy way to explain this. I'm going to be lazy, but that's okay. So this deck is basically a version of a post deck that includes blue, red, and green. Now, first looking at this deck, I was a little put off by the fact that it did have three colors. It's very hard for a three-colored deck to find success in Pauper. I did put up a series on Pure. If you search through the article archives, you can go check that out. And I did kind of talk about the fact that it's hard for a three-colored deck to be successful in Pauper. Usually you'll see a two-colored deck and that's about it. Now, there is a lot of stuff that can be gained, as you'll see in these videos, through stuff like Coiling Oracle, and there are ways like Explore to bring out extra lands, as well as the Evolving Wilds. So you would think that finding the colors is not so hard. And I will admit, in playing it, I did expect it to be a lot worse than it was. Kind of a sky is falling kind of thing. I thought, uh-oh, three colors, there's no way this is going to work. But it did actually work a little bit better than expected. The deck looks like something, honestly, that would not work. There was a lot of things that I was hesitant about, and in playing it, and if you can see through these example games, it actually won a surprising number of the games. It will get outpaced very easily by fast decks. One of the replays that is in this package here is with Goblin's deck, and those fast aggro decks will absolutely wreck this. You do get the Flame Slash, which is something that Is It Post makes good use of as far as control for creatures, but more importantly, Is It Post gets things like Lightning Bolt as well. This deck is basically focusing on just Flame Slash as opposed to multiple burn spells to control creatures. So that's one part. Kind of makes this a little more vulnerable, and that's definitely a tough thing if you wanted to play this as a competitive option, because you do have so many aggro decks in the format. Goblins is out there, even though it has declined in recent weeks, but mono white aggro is on the rise. In my recent competitive corner, it was second overall for the past 2 weeks. And you also have Stompy out there, which is very fast, and you have to be able to deal with Infect, which is even faster. It's not your traditional aggro deck, but it is something you definitely have to be aware of. So I'm just going to throw out a general comment. I think this deck lacks the ability to handle those. Infect especially is an incredibly bad matchup for this deck. Now, I will tell you that it did play pretty well. You can get a lot of ground based off the fact that you are running those battlements that you have in there. I know you said that was why you would put this deck together, and it is definitely a nice mana dork to have in there. But at the same time, I kind of wonder how much more important it is to have that as opposed to just something like a Llanowar Elf. You really don't have much of a difference except for the fact that the battlement's going to cost one more. I rarely found myself in a game where I had more than just one battlement on the field at any point in time, so that tells me that it's going to always be giving me one green mana. Let's see, where to start with this. There was a couple of cards that I really felt needed to go. First off, Condescend is something that you're running 4 of them, but I at most usually like to run 3. 4 does give you the opportunity to come into those more often, and that does give you a bit more control. Like I said, the Flame Slash is kind of a very minimal control option, and so I can see where you would want 4 Condescends, but I still feel like at the same time, having so many of those, you increase the odds of you drawing those in the early game, and those aren't as great because you're still trying to get your Cloud Posts online, and even worse, you may not necessarily have an island with this 3-colored mana pool. That kind of is another holdback that I found with the Coiling Oracles as well. It's one thing to have all these spells that have a colorless plus a one specific color in their casting cost. But to get something like the Coiling Oracle, which takes 2 specific colors out of 3, makes it a little bit harder to cast. But if I had to cut things back in this deck, I would definitely 100%, I would get rid of the Sprout Swarm, first and foremost. I did not, in all of my games playing this deck, I did not draw this once. I understand that it was probably in there as an alternative option for a win condition, but it is really definitely 100% not necessary. Every time I went to sideboarding, I took it out. This is something that, I mean, you're running a full set of Crushers, which is great. The Muldrifters are also going to give you an option for the win condition, and then you're running 2 copies of Rolling Thunder, so you have plenty of win conditions. If you look at a typical Izzet Post deck or a Dimir Post deck, they really don't run many creatures. You can find many of them running just like 6 creatures, and that's about it. The Sprout Swarm is something that I think is entirely unnecessary, and that's 1 card spot, I realize, but you could definitely find something better to go into that open slot. I'm not entirely sure what it would be, but if you wanted to throw something else in there, say you wanted to, and I really hate to do this because the deck is running blue and red, so many times as I'm playing through this and thinking of changes to make, it came back to successful things that would work in Izzet Post in the blue-red version. But I don't want to basically change your deck from what it is into Izzet Post, because that's not really keeping it as your deck. That being said, I still feel like maybe, cut out a Condescend and a Sprout Swarm and bring in a couple Lightning Bolts. Maybe. Something like that would be an interesting option as well. It's just the Sprout Swarm. The Condescend, that's, if you wanted to keep that as a full set, that is fine. That is something that goes either way. I think me wanting it to be a 3 of is personal preference, but I think the one thing that really needs to be worked out of here is Sprout Swarm. Also, the 4C, I'm personally not a fan of 4C. I probably would prefer something like Deep Analysis instead. There's a lot of cool stuff that 4C can do because of the fact that it allows you to scry as well as draw cards. But the thing with, in comparison to Deep Analysis gives you the opportunity to play the card in additional time because of the flashback ability. Another quick thought on the Sprout Swarm is, usually if you see the decks that are running something like that as a single card, they're usually bringing in the copies of Mystical Teachings in order to tutor that out. Like I said, I played all these games, I didn't see it a single time, so if I had something like Mystical Teachings, then it would be something that I could find if needed. Otherwise, I'm going to sit here, and you even said yourself in your email that it just wasn't as... There's not as much draw in this deck as in your typical version with the Izzet Post. And there is actually a surprising amount of draw with this deck as you have it set up, but at the same time, finding that single Sprout Swarm is very hard to do, and I think that is definitely an open slot that you can maneuver around with. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the Abundant Growth. Now, I know you say also that you really were kind of inspired by this to toss in the green, and this is why you went green. Now, I'm not trying to say get rid of green, that's not necessarily the answer here, but I don't think Abundant Growth is that much better that it can justify replacing Prophetic Prism. It does come in at a single cost as opposed to a double, but the difference is that Abundant Growth takes 1 green mana. So in order to get that, you have to find forests, which is a little bit harder because, again, you're running 3 colors. If I have something like Prophetic Prism, and kind of the big appeal to that is the fact that it costs colorless mana. With the Glimmer Post and the Cloud Post, we're generating a large amount of colorless mana, and finding that 2 colorless mana in order to put that into play is going to be 100 times easier for you than finding a single green. There were many times where I found myself in a situation where I had Cloud Posts and a forest, and it's like, well, now I can put Abundant Growth on a forest, but that's, I don't know, it just seems wrong. And at the same time, you could put it on a Cloud Post, but why would you want to do that? You can also find yourself in situations where you've gotten a whole bunch of Cloud Posts and Glimmer Posts and you have not gotten a green. Maybe you have some blue and red mana as well, but you still don't have that green, and so you're holding a bunch of Abundant Growths until a point in time where you can put that into play. It's just a bit janky. I really think it is not as good as Prophetic Prism, so I would absolutely switch those back to the Prisms. It is a real staple in the 8-post decks for a reason. it works really well, and you're not really losing anything. Like I said, it's going to cost you 1 extra mana to get into a play, but I think the fact that it has the 2 colorless mana makes it more accessible to the deck, especially when you're trying to run 3 colors. Um, but again, this is where things kind of get weird. So if we take a look at this deck list that you've sent me, right? And I said I don't want to take it away from going 3 colors, but your green spells are Sprout Swarm, Abundant Growth, Explore, and the Coiling Oracle. I'm sorry, and the Battlement. So there is quite a lot of green, but I'm telling you, get rid of the Abundant Growth, get rid of the Sprout Swarm. So that brings you down to 3 color cards, 3 green cards. You have now Explore, Oracle, and the Battlement. I'm also saying, hey, I think maybe the Oracle is not the best choice. You could definitely leave it in there. I just think it's a little hard sometimes to play. So I feel like that's like saying, hey, get rid of the green, but don't do it. I think you can have a lot of fun with this deck. I think it's a great option. I haven't actually, I'll be honest, I haven't made the changes that I'm suggesting and tried it from there. These are just my thoughts as I've played through. I apologize I don't have the time to sit and continuously rebuild this for you. But I would definitely recap this real quick. I would get rid of the Sprout Swarm. I'm not really sure what you want to put in there instead. And then I would definitely replace the Abundant Growths with Prophetic Prism. Those are my definites for the main deck. Other than that, I would consider, these are the maybe changes. Maybe cut Condescend down to 3. Maybe change 4C to Deep Analysis because of the fact that it gives you that second draw. I think those are kind of my maybe options there. The only other suggestion that I would make for your main deck is consider Coiling Oracle. Maybe you make the changes where you replace the growths and the swarm, bring in something else, and see if the Oracle is still a little tough to play. There were times where it was easy to play and not. Just keep in mind that. And the other big tip that I will give you is after you make those changes, definitely analyze your land count. 24 is fine, I'm not going to object to that, but I would say that if you make changes, especially if you're losing green, I would look at your basic split. You have 5, 4, 3. I would take a look at that and maybe rearrange to better fit whatever your new mana is. For example, if you're taking out the swarm and the growth and you're bringing in lightning bolts, well, then you might have to bring in at least one more mountain to your land base and take out a forest, something like that. Just something to keep in mind. So as the deck played overall, like I said, my biggest issues were against the fast aggro decks. I found myself pretty dominant against all the other post decks because of all the acceleration. You said in yourself, in your email, that you do get a lot of ways to get extra mana, and this deck can ramp that mana up real fast, and it has a lot of options to get that going. So if your opponent is playing Cloud Posts as well as you, it's going to just help you that much more. Having the 4 Crushers in here is definitely the right choice. It increases the odds of you drawing them, and I found myself actually drawing those pretty frequently, especially with the little bit of extra draw that came from the Muldrifters and whatnot. So being able to get those is fantastic. You actually came into the Rolling Thunders, and I agree that these are definitely the right choice there as well. As opposed to Karavek's Torch, Rolling Thunder is definitely the right call for this deck because of the fact that, like I said, it struggles with those aggro matchups, so being able to bring in Rolling Thunder to clear the board is definitely the right choice. So I actually found when you're playing like the Is It Post matchups or any other matchup playing with the other posts, you can ramp up that much faster, and you're actually going to be able to win a lot of those, at least game 1. So that's kind of my generic thoughts of the main deck. Now, my 100% biggest problem with this deck list that you have sent me is the sideboard. Now, I really did not like the sideboard. I would probably cut 90% of these cards out of the sideboard. The maybe board, you listed 14 cards in your sideboard, and I was looking through the maybes as what I would bring in as the final for that, and I didn't like any of these options. Actually, looking at it now, you do have Capsize in there. Maybe that would be an okay replacement for Sprout Swim, but again, the Singleton card is something that you're not going to be able to draw into that often because of the fact that you're not running teachings. But getting back to the sideboard. So 2 copies of Ancient Grudge. I'm okay with that. That is one card that I agree with. I would keep. That's a great answer for you for a lot of the decks, actually, because it can help with Is It Post a little. So I definitely think that's a good choice. It's a great card for the Affinity matchup. It's definitely a good call. Echoing Truth is a great call as well. That's like a necessary evil for all the Storm decks that are out there. Definitely some good stuff that can be had by that. I might, depending, I mean, Storm has been really dominant recently, so that almost would tempt me to bring up the count for Echoing Truth to 3 as opposed to just 2. But that would depend. I mean, this week it kind of faltered heavily in comparison to what it did. So as far as land destruction for the mirror matchup, 2 Reap and Sow is something I'm kind of on the fence about. I think it's a good idea. Having an option for land destruction in the mirror matchup is good. There are so many different options available to you as far as destroying land. Reap and Sow is a pretty good one because you do have so many problems with 3-colored mana. I'm trying to think how to word this. When you're running a 3-color deck, it is a little bit harder, a little bit more difficult for you to kind of ramp up. And you do a pretty good job with this deck as you have it set up so far, but it can be a little difficult. Now, what I might suggest is bringing in Earth Rift if you wanted to slide a little more towards the red side. It's a really great option because of the flashback ability. So I would probably go with either Earth Rift or the Reap and Sow for the sideboard option. Other stuff like the Thermokarst and the Acid Moss I don't think would work as well for you, especially because those require a double green in the casting cost. Reap and Sow, while it can cost double green with the Entwine, is not going to hands down every time require that additional cost. So that's a good thing. Like I said, I found actually in the matchups that I was helped most of the games against the mirror because of the fact that they had those. So I was kind of wondering actually if I would actually want to bring in that extra land destruction. So I guess, I don't know, that's another thing that I guess you should test. Now I'm looking and I'm assuming some of these choices were made because of the ever so popular Delver option. Delver is definitely a hard thing to beat, and it does have a lot of flyers. That being said, 3 copies of Assault Zeppelid and the Crushing Vines. I really don't like these options. The Zeppelid more than the Vines. The Zeppelid, I don't know. It's kind of a heavy cost. Again, we're coming into that issue with it being a gold card, so it's hard to be able to, finding any one of these 3 colors is a little bit difficult at times, but being able to make sure that you have 2 of the 3 can be a little bit more hard. It's not something killer, and I don't think it's going to make it game over. Maybe even a little easier if you bring in those prisms, but the Zeppelid, I don't know what I would bring it in for. I'm assuming that you had it in here for the matchup with Delver, and it's a little clunky. I mean, I love it for casual play. It's one of my favorites, but I think bringing it in against Delver is not going to be your best option for that deck as far as sideboard is concerned. Crushing Vines is a little bit better to deal with those flyers, those pesky little damn fairies. There is the Weatherseed Fairy, which I would have suggested, except for the fact that costs 2 blue to cast, so that is a little bit more difficult. I might actually suggest instead, if you're looking for an option for a sideboard against Delver, trying Sandstorm, because that would have options for playing either against Delver or it could be used in the Storm matchup as well. So it's something that gives a little more utility to your card choices. The Gladeheart, I'm assuming was in there for red deck wins, and that is something that is not, it doesn't show up enough in competitive play to warrant a card in the sideboard for playing against it. Now, that being said, I did have a Goblins game here where, again, going back to that fast aggro being troublesome, a little extra life gain might have definitely helped out. So, maybe the Gladeheart, but at the same time, they bring in a lot of stuff like Lightning Bolt to deal with this, and if this is kind of your best answer for that matchup, then they're definitely going to hold out and use that. I'm really not sure what. Maybe a third copy of Rolling Thunder in the sideboard could be an option for you. It's definitely something that is a little bit more difficult to deal with being 3 colors. When you're in just a single color or double colored, picking out sideboard cards is 100 times easier because you know kind of what the monocolor versions of those decks do. Is it post? You know what blue does for answering certain things. You know what red can do for answering certain things. So picking these cards are definitely a little bit more give or take, hit or miss kind of thing. The negate in here is an okay choice. Maybe that's something you want to increase the number of available cards for that. My only problem with it is I don't know. I feel like the counter spells need to have a little more draw. They need to have a little more power or substance behind them than a single negate. A single negate, sure, it's going to help you one random time maybe, but it's again going back to that rule where it's a single card in your deck and you're not going to be able to find it very easily because there's no tutor abilities. It does, sure, it gives you some options, but being able to bring in 2 or 3 copies of a card increases the odds that you draw it. And that's just, a basic component of this game. I'm just trying to think what other options are available to you. Capsize is kind of nice, but it requires a bit of a heavier blue commitment, and again, 3 colors, it makes this a little more difficult to do. Let's see what else you had here. The Caravex Torch, I understand it's a stronger burn spell against like the control matchup, but I really think this deck uses the Rolling Thunder better. The Lightning Bolt, I think, is something that could be used. Borderland Ranger, maybe I would, if you were replacing the Coiling Oracle, I might try the Ranger. It gives you at least a little bit more flexibility because it has the colorless cost available to it. Maybe even instead try the Sylvan Ranger, because that is the 2 casting cost. It's a 1 and a green with the same ability as the Borderland Ranger, and it's the 1/1. So it's a little bit smaller, but it would be a decent replacement for Coiling Oracle because of the fact that it doesn't require a second color. It's got a colorless and 1 green, and that might be something that would work for you as well. Kind of my problem with the Crushing Vines and you had is maybe the Eaten by Spiders. My problem with these is the fact that the cost is so heavy. Sure, you're running 8 posts and you can bring in a lot of mana off the Cloud Posts once it gets going, but still that 2 colorless and a green cost is just, it feels a little clunky to me, and that's what I would say about that. I really think that, there's some potential to this deck. I don't know it would ever be a tier 1, tier 2 kind of deck. I do think maybe with a lot of refining, it could become something a little more powerful, and maybe, do decent in a daily if you found the right matchups. Definitely the key thing to look at here, I would say, is the sideboard and reworking that and definitely tuning that out. I found actually what I had a lot of problems with playing this deck is coming to sideboarding, and I knew what cards that I wanted to bring into the deck, but I wasn't exactly sure what I should be taking out of the deck. And I've played maybe 20 games with this deck now and still not sure what I wanted to take out, because I said I would take out Sprout Swarm every time, but and maybe a Condescend, but other than that, I want the Crushers, I want the Rolling Thunder, I want the Flame Slash because it's like the only control we have available, and then I needed the Abundant Growths because there's no Prisms. Those that even if those were Prisms, they would stay. You wouldn't be taking those out. Coiling Oracle is something I would occasionally go to, but the Drifters I wanted in because they were like the only draw cards. The 4C, I'm like, well, it's a one of, so that's something that I could replace, but at the same time, it's draw, and I really wanted the draw. So maybe Explorers could come out, and I felt that there was very little room for knowing what to sideboard in and out. So maybe that's something that would come with a bit more testing. But I would definitely recommend taking a look at this deck again and seeing what you can come up with. I would definitely work on the sideboard first and foremost and get rid of the Sprout Swarm and switch the Abundant Growths to Prophetic Prisms. So there you have it. I hope this helps you out, and this is something I guess I will open up to others who may be interested. It's going to take a while for responses from me. If you ask this individual, it did take me a couple weeks before I could get back to him, but I will at least make an effort to take a look at your deck, make some suggestions. I make no guarantees of being the ultimate deck doctor here, but I'm always open to talking about decks and what changes can be made. So I'm going to put the link to my email address down in the comment section here, the description, and if you want to shoot off a deck list, just tell me what you're kind of leaning for with the deck, whether you want it to be competitive or casual, and I will do my best to get it to you.